Hi everyone. Welcome to the semifinals of SASDO 2021. Congratulations to both teams for making it so far. My name is Atlas. I'm going to be the chair for this round. Paneling with me, we have Claire Lee. On Team Government, we have Team Nation of Texas. On Team Opposition, we have Team Patek. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome the first government speaker to open the case for Team Government. Here. Claire, time signals. Thanks.
Judge, we live in a very terrible status quo. Millions lay famished in Yemen and sub-Saharan states in Africa. Millions face systemic racism all throughout the world. And billions suffer the deadly consequences of a deadly pandemic like unemployment, starvation, and depressed mental health. All of these crises have something in common. They're all causing individuals and humans to have a low amount of pressure and to lead very unfulfilling lives. If we look at the world of Logan's Run, you have a world with limitless utility where people are inherently fulfilled and have infinite access to all forms of pleasure. None of the aforementioned drawbacks of famine, starvation, and pandemics really exist. And all in all, people are happy and living a life without worry. So on side proposition, we believe that today is a debate about whether if maximizing utility is justified at the cost of a shortened life. And on side proposition, we strongly affirm the stance that it is completely justified. My points will take three main things. One is a psychological justification, one's a biological justification, and the final one would be a principled argument. So moving on to the first one. So I think like one part of very biological and within the biological nature of most creatures is that according to biology, humans have the like innate need to reproduce. In Logan's world, this is completely guaranteed, and a child is raised, and that's also completely guaranteed. In the status quo, we see many individuals who want to fulfill that biological need to have children and who want to fulfill that biological need. And it's very fulfilling for individuals to have children. However, in the status quo, we see many individuals who are unable to do so, leading to a very unfulfilled life, and or people who actually do have children, but don't actually have the necessary resources to raise them properly and completely, which also leads to things like a depressed mental state and of like disorders like anxiety and depression, which we believe we limit completely on our side of the house, whilst providing the benefit of fulfilling the biological need to have children. And like all that also leads to the whole idea of the pursuit of happiness, which we believe is more attainable in Logan's Run's world than in like the opposition's case. Moving on to our second point, where we talk about the psychology of Logan's Run. So essentially, we believe that humans have the undeniable urge and the need to pursue happiness. So people will always try to be happy, right? So we can see this through like in history where like the US gained independence from the British Empire in pursuit of happiness, and communist revolutions overthrowing unjust leaders in pursuit of happiness. We believe that all of these are good examples of how humans have the innate urge to actually try and achieve happiness. And we believe that the whole world of Logan's Run does this without any sort of failure, right? So all in Logan's Run, in that sort of scenario, you don't need to actually pursue happiness because happiness is automatically accessible to you. We believe that this already shows that individuals are much more happy in Logan's Run's world. And I think when every single individual knows that they're going to eventually go somewhere else at the age of 30, then obviously, then like the pursuit of happiness is justified if the drawback is that you're going to have to die at 30. Now, why is this? So we believe that in the first 30 years of the life, you're granted many things that are probably impossible to get in the current status quo. One of them being complete freedom, right? Humans are very free creatures. Humans can think independently and act independently and act like free creatures, unlike many other mammalian species in the nature. So we believe that in Logan's world, people are given the right and the ability to do whatever they want. They can do all sorts of things they want without any sort of drawback or without any sort of backlash or without any sort of fiscal responsibility, which we believe allows individuals to be more free, So first of all, fulfilling the biological urge for individuals to be free, and also allowing people to lead more fulfilling lives as they do whatever they want, right? This quote is oftentimes overused in debates, and it's like, give me liberty or give me death. And I think this is a good example of this, and it can be totally applied to this scenario as well. So now moving on to our last point, which is an attempt to like justify the guaranteed death at the age of 30. So first of all, I think that this age limit at age 30 grants multiple things. First of all, it gives people something to be aware of. It gives people a deadline. It gives people incentive to do whatever they want before the age of 30. It makes people, incentivizes people to work harder, incentivizes people to act in a better way before the age of 30, where they'll inevitably face their death. Now, why is this a good thing? Because in the status quo, we see a lot of people who don't know what they want to do with their lives. They're experiencing midlife crises, and they are genuinely unmotivated. And with pandemics and all of these, it makes people very depressed. It makes people very sad. And now all of these people, all of these individuals, now they don't have a goal in life. And with the age gap of 30, age limit of 30, we believe that it gives individuals a goal and something to be aware of. So basically, in Logan's world, everybody knows that they need to have all the fun they can have before age 30. We believe this is good because it reduces the chances of people living an unfulfilled life, as they know that they need to fulfill everything in life before the age of 30. And we believe that this limits things like individuals who are feeling unfulfilled. Like a lot of great individuals in history have said, the goal of the human individual is to live a fulfilling life. And what better way to live a fulfilled life than to have a child that's guaranteed to grow up and lead the same life as yours, and to have unlimited happiness before the age of 30. We believe that this is why a world of Logan's Run is completely justified. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the first government speaker for that speech. Now I'd like to invite the first opposition speaker to open the case for team opposition. Hear, hear.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. What the proposition has failed to address during the entire debate is how, in Logan's world, the idea that it is fulfilling and you can get fulfillment whenever you want inside of their world is completely justified. They completely neglected to mechanize how that works, and completely neglected to show why it is inherently why their world is inherently fulfilling, right? So that I'll be going into some rebuttals first, and then going into my first contention. My second speaker will be going to the second contention. So for rebuttals. So firstly, they talked about the biological aspect, right? Of how because humans have an innate ability to reproduce, and how in the current status quo, many individuals can't do so. It's beneficial in their world because they can reproduce at ease, and it'll alleviate like the depression and anxiety we have in our current world, right? But we see that, like, first off, it's really important to understand that they didn't really fully mechanize as to like the biological justification as to as to why why that brings fulfillment to the actual to the person. But also they also fail to recognize that the importance of social connection inside of the relationship, right? We see that it is true that humans have an innate desire to reproduce, but aside from reproducing, they also have an innate nature to find social connections. And we think that the idea of finding social connections is even more important. Thank you. It's actually even more important than their innate ability to reproduce. We see that when they find that we know that humans innately are social creatures, and because they're social creatures, we see that it's really important for them to find fulfilling social interactions, which my second speaker will be talking about, and how that is actually completely unfeasible inside of their model, right? So secondly, they talked about how liberty, and how you'll be completely free. But the issue is that you won't actually be free, because the issue is that you'll have the ability to just do whatever you want, and you can just everything is actually accessible to you. And we see that as an actual drawback as to what you can do, because the issue with having too much liberty is you're literally controlled by your urges in a hedonistic society, right? You're controlled by your biological urges. You're controlled by what just the feeling of wanting to be happy or wanting to be fulfilled, right? We see that like in that sense, you actually aren't forced and you're not pressured to actually live a fulfilling life. No, thank you. Now I'll be going to my first contention, which is essentially how, especially in their model, what we have is essentially a mundane world of which people actually can't feel happiness or feel fulfillment in their lives. However, in the status quo, the opposite is actually true, right? We see that it's really important to show what happiness essentially is, right? We see that happiness, in essence, is a difference from the original state. It is a better distinction from the original mental state, right? Things like let's say, for example, like winning a lottery, right? Because originally you were in an original state, you're in like normal, but then you get a lot of money suddenly, like because you won a lottery, and it makes you really happy because you have a lot of money you can spend and you can actually like do stuff with it, right? So that's the difference between happiness and just being in the natural state, right? We see that in their model. What happens is a mundane world. So why is it a mundane world? It's because you have everything accessible to you. You have everything. Whenever you reach, like you eventually reach a ceiling as to what you feel is fulfilling, right? So essentially, in their world, they're constantly seeking short-term pleasures of life, like getting high or having sex or going to temporary love shops, right? You see that this simply becomes a habit inside of their world because they are readily available to you, and you have the ability to do them whenever you want. And of course, because they're quote-unquote pleasurous, that's why you do them. And if you know that they give you a sense of satisfaction, you obviously will try to use those services as much as possible. However, you will never get any sense of actual happiness, a distinction from the natural bit, not from your natural state. Because essentially what happens there, you'll feel perpetually, because humans derive happiness from sadness, where they understand when they feel really happy only when they know how to feel sad. It's different from their original condition because happiness is classified as a feeling better than usual and being more fulfilled than usual, right? We can see that often, like in the current status quo, how the rich complain about feeling bored in their world, even though they have all the money in the world, and how they always try to buy like short-term things like new clothes or new toys and new things, right? But we see that but why is that in nations such as Bhutan, which is the happiest place in the world, why they live so very frugally? They aren't very rich, and they don't indulge in these things, but yet they still feel very happy, and because they're taught to live in the moment. Their experiences, different experiences, when they play with their kids, and which is greater than their original sense of fulfillment, right? We see that in our world, in the status quo, things like these are like, such as like living, like I said, like winning the lottery, or let's say maybe like asking a girl out and they saying yes. These things are sudden. These things are which instigate a sense of happiness because it is a greater sense of fulfillment than their normal state. But what is it like? It's really important to establish what's a normal state. Like the normal state is essentially just like living normally, waking up in the morning is essentially from that mundane part of life inside of the status quo, right? We see that in our world, we can actually instigate this happiness. We actually are able to, we're allowed to have this distinction between happiness and just being normal or being sad. And that's only possible in our world where emotions actually exist. We see that in their world is really difficult. It's basically impossible for emotions to actually exist because you'll continue to indulge yourself with things that quote unquote make you feel like fulfilled, but at the end of the day will never make you feel happy because you'll feel the same things over and over again. Once you get high, like once you have drugs, you get high, you'll seek to get higher and higher and higher, but at the end of the day, you'll reach a limit as to how high you can go. When you have sex, you keep on having sex in, like with different positions or different stuff, which will make you feel happy. But at the end of the day, there's a limit to how high that we can go. But in our status quo, there's no potential to how happy you can be because there is the distinction between being normal and being sad, which is why I'm very happy to propose. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the first opposition speaker for that speech. Now I'd like to invite the second government speaker to continue the case for team government. Hear, hear.
All right, so am I clear and audible to everyone? Okay, cool. Judge, realize how completely uncomparative the opposition case is. Even taking out their absolute best case, where these individuals do live in a completely mundane world, where they only have short-term happiness, we think it's still more likely that this happiness is actually attainable for them. Because in the status quo today, so many individuals in the right now are unable to attain this sort of happiness. They don't have the liberty to be able to live a fulfilling life. They don't have the ability to receive the pleasures in life. We think in general, the vast majority of people inside proposition's world will still live a more happy life compared to the status quo. And we think this is completely human nature. This is what living a good life should be. Never prouder to propose. I'll just mainly go through two things in my speech. One, on happiness, which side actually gives people more happiness. Second of all, on human nature, which side actually adheres to human nature, both biologically and psychologically. Moving on to our first clash on happiness, right? Let's just examine what opposition has essentially told us. Their only contention in this entire debate is essentially that these lives are just not fulfilling, right? Their entire case essentially just tells us that because of the fact that you're just receiving these pleasures every single day and you have it so accessible to you, you're unable to actually receive happiness. Okay, 4 lines of response here, right? One, realize that on our side, it's still much better, right? Because realize that we can actually attain this happiness in the first place. The society on their side is just completely unable to give these pleasure and actual happiness to most individuals because of the conditions surrounding them, such as work, such as having the stress of maintaining relationships, such as having the fear of war and disease. All these things on their side completely limit the amount of happiness that most individuals get because of the fact that they have to try to remove themselves from these negatives in the first place. But second line, right? They also tell us in their point that you can only get happiness when you experience sadness. This is essentially untrue because of the fact that this happiness that you get is just an extension of the sadness that you receive, right? Well, on our side, what you get is that you always get happiness. People always get the sense of pleasure. People always get the sense of satisfaction when they finish plastic surgery and they think they're looking fresh as hell. Because of this means that these individuals are able to feel happiness, right? This is a sort of happiness to them. This sort of pleasure and actual feeling of acceptance is the happiness for them. On the contrary, in the status quo on their side, most individuals needs the burden to actually try to make themselves presentable to others, which means they're more likely to spend so much of their allowances on things such as drugs, on things such as plastic surgery. While on our side, we already give it to you for free, right? The state already provides for absolutely everything that person requires. Due to this, it is still so much better on our side because of the fact that we actually give people the happiness. Thirdly, realize that when they tell you that the rich individuals are just not going to feel happiness because of the fact that they have so much money. This example itself is just not necessarily linked to the actual thing, right? Because realize that the rich in the status quo today, they still have a lot of stress, right? They still have the burden to actually maintain their lives. They still have the stress to actually keep their business running. We think this is not necessarily correlated to the debate because of the fact that on our side, we still guarantee that most individuals have no stress in the world. Again, this removal of stress as well as the removal of burden allows most individuals to receive the liberty that they need, right? This means that most individuals are able to get the sort of actual happiness that they actually want inside life right now. Just to this, Judge, let's look up to what Connor told you, right? Connor has already told you that through the world of Logan's Run, we guarantee that most individuals can feel happy because of the fact that when the state provides for absolutely everything, it means that the person themselves don't have any more stress on maintaining finances. They don't have any more stress on trying to maintain harsh relationships. They don't have any more stress on trying to attain as well as trying to maintain their lives in the status quo today, right? Also, notice that the opposition side basically just didn't respond to our third contention, which is about why 30 years is a really good thing, right? Because realize that after you are at 30 years old, it means that you have so much more stress, right? Realize that after 30 years old, people begin to feel their body to actually start being old, right? They think that their skin is starting to grow wrinkles. They think that their own body is becoming more aged. This means that these individuals have so much stress on their lives to try to make themselves young again, because they think that because of the fact that being young allows them to guarantee the most happiness in their entire lives. Due to this, these individuals will have to feel so much stress because of the fact that they're now old and will likely feel pain when they actually receive disease, when they actually become crippled in the future. We think that on our side, when you guarantee that most individuals could just die at 30 years old, it means that most individuals have the incentive to just live an absolutely happy life. They have an incentive to live a fulfilling life where they can still talk with other people, right? And also I just want to respond to something that they just talked about like a one-liner. They told us that, you're not going to give any relationships to individuals status quo today. Notice that this is completely untrue because of the fact that on our side, we still guarantee people have friends, right? We still guarantee that people can still socialize. The info site does not say that these individuals are just not not going to have any more friends. Moving on to the second one, on human nature, right? And I think we should already win this class because of the lack of any response from their side, right? Their response to our biological nature, essentially that, these individuals, there's no mech to prove that these individuals will get the biological needs fulfilled, right? But realize that on our side, we guarantee that most individuals can still socialize, or we guarantee that most individuals have little stress, therefore they have more ability to raise kids. Realize that on our side, the state cares for the kids, so there's no significant stress on parents to actually try to care for the kids, as well as to deter them from having kids because of their financial strain. Due to this, we actually fulfill the human biological nature to have kids because of the fact that we give people freedom to do so. And on the happiness point, right? Realize that their side just also basically didn't respond to this because their entire response is that, these individuals are just not going to live a fulfilled life, right? Realize I've already responded to this, right? Because when you actually have happiness, it means you are already living a fulfilled life. The psychological human nature of everyone is to try to live the best life, is to try to remove stress. While our side provides for this, absolutely, please vote side proposition.
I'd like to thank the second government speaker for that speech. Now I'd like to invite the second opposition speaker to continue the case for Team Op. Here.
I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. In regards to what the proposition just proposed, they mentioned a biological need, a loss of the heightened freedom that one experiences in this hedonistic society, and also explain how those that are rich, how our argument that the rich ultimately do feel a sense of satisfaction from their monetary surplus. I will first go through my rebuttals of the propositions model and their case, and then I will be going into our second contention. First of all, they address this need for a biological need and how people have the ability to reproduce, and as such, they want to fulfill that need. We think that this is just irrelevant to the debate. We think that this idea to reproduce is something that only our caveman ancestors sought. We believe that, especially nowadays, that can be seen in the status quo, people are starting to not form families, people are starting to not have kids in the pursuit of an occupation or because they are poor. We believe that the biological justification has nothing to do with actual fulfillment. We believe that, especially in light of recent years, the idea of starting a family, having kids has essentially fallen in importance and the forefront of people's priorities. We believe that starting a family is no longer at the forefront of people's priorities in today's society. Additionally, they explained that we didn't rebut this idea of give me liberty or give me death, and that how a hedonistic society ultimately liberates people, allows them to do what they want. However, I feel like we did adequately rebut this, as my first speaker said. Due to the fact that you are in a hedonistic society, you're essentially controlled by your urges. We believe that you ultimately may not seek what you want, but you're ultimately controlled by the extremely strong. No, thank you. You're ultimately controlled by the extremely strong yet irrational urges of the human mind. A good example is alcohol or sex. You may know that these things are wrong. You may know that you shouldn't be overindulging in your drinks. You may know that you don't want to overdose. You may know that you don't want to overtake on this medication, but due to the irrational and very strong and compelling feelings of these primal biological urges, you ultimately lose your sense of free will. You lose the ability to form independent free thought, and you ultimately become a slave to your own emotions and primitive urges, which are not fit to today's society. They're fit for the Neolithic. No, thank you. They are fit for the Neolithic age, cavemen, wherein these things were scarce. Yet the same idea can be addressed with obesity and diabetes. Cavemen and our ancestors are naturally drilled in us with an incentive to eat sugary foods or salty foods due to the scarcity of these. However, in today's society, as we increase the surplus, these biological incentives and urges have ultimately become a detriment to our state of mind and our well-being, which ultimately topples this entire idea of a biological need from the proposition. Additionally, they explain how the rich will actually gain a sense of fulfillment from their monetary surplus because they need to maintain their high position of power. We believe that this is completely fallacious. We think that they fail to acknowledge those that retire. We think we exemplify this in those people that are retired, that have accomplished their goals, that have been rich, that have been to the top, and now they have nowhere more to go. No, thank you. And the retired individuals often feel lost in life. They feel as if they are stagnating, they're not going anywhere, and they're meandering in life, which ties to the first point wherein we talked about how happiness are relative truths. Happiness and suffering are relative truths. They are not absolute. One cannot exist without the other. They also talk about this idea of living 30 years and how it somehow brings about happiness, but we think that just further proves our point, as they talk about how an initiation, a trigger of stress is the ultimate bringer of happiness, and how the relative between these two ultimately is what brings about true fulfillment. We think that that point actually supports our point. Now I'll be going into the importance of human condition and companionship. We believe that in the hedonistic society, human condition and companionship ceases to exist. People lack the capacity to form real and genuine relationship when weed, sex, and plastic surgery is just a click away. People lose the fundamental nature of their humanity, which is their ability to form relationships, and due to the nature of these fleeting happiness which these hedonistic practices give you without the ability to form real relationships, humans are naturally because of the fact that humans are naturally and instinctively required to form relationship with those around us. In a world where all the world's processes are run and controlled by AI, people no longer seek these genuine relationships, and rather than getting a girlfriend by meeting her, approaching her, and eventually establishing a genuine point of trust with her, experiencing and sharing in hardship collectively, and gaining a sense of fulfillment from a genuine, heartfelt relationship, many will instead turn to their instinctive urges to have sex. They will be controlled by their biological, extremely compelling primal urges. They will indulge in prostitution, and as such, many of these real human conditions are lost in the ether of a fully indulging, hedonistic, AI-controlled society. In Proposition's world, people ultimately lose themselves in a hedonistic society, overindulging and lacking the capacity and incentive, the key initiative to go out and form these genuine relationships, which provide a sense of lasting, overall, sustainable fulfillment and happiness.
Why?
Due to the relative nature of, I'll take that later. Due to the relative nature of happiness and suffering, and the incapacity of short-term materialistic pleasures to provide us with a lasting and sustainable sense of fulfillment and happiness, life under Logan's Run's world would ultimately prove to be a dystopian society wherein people are desensitized to the pleasures in life, lack the ability to form genuine and heartfelt relationships which provide them with the actual sense of fulfillment, this actual feeling of sustainable, real, genuine fulfillment, and at their core lose their fundamental sense of humanity and fulfillment, leading to an overall loss in the well-being. And we believe that, oh yeah, just to get to one more point, I'll take your PI. To address the idea of how in their world the poor are ultimately, they'll feel better. We believe that their solution is no better than ours. We believe that, to give an example of a homeless man winning a lottery, how they spend it on drugs. A lot of homeless people, when they gain drugs, they also win the lottery. They ultimately spend it in drugs and indulge in these instinctive primal urges, and ultimately end up less happy than they were when they're homeless. I don't believe I have time to take your POI. Sorry. As such, I am proud to oppose. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the second opposition speaker for that speech. Now I'd like to invite the opposition whip to close the case for team opposition. Hear, hear.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, what has the opposition given you today in this debate, right? We've given you 2 solid contentions and rebutted all three of the contentions that the proposition has given us today, right? They've given us, and those are 3 of the clash of the debate, right? The first clash of the debate is which will provide more happiness and fulfillment, right? We talked about how essentially inside of their world, they're not able to actually get this fulfillment because they talk about how they get fulfillment through biological needs, through liberty, and through these ways they're able to get and addressing their psychological needs, and through that they're finally able to get fulfillment, right? We see that essentially through the general distinction of what happiness really is, and how the 2 truths of happiness and sadness can't they must coexist to actually exist. We see that essentially their point has been like, if we take them out of the best scenario, of which these biological needs actually make them a little bit make them happy, and which they gain liberty. At the end of the day, we see that what will happen is they will end up overindulging in these quote unquote happiness practices, such as having sex, such as having drugs, such as going to love shops, and as a result of that, they will be controlled. Their sense of liberty, as a result, will be controlled by their just their human irrationality of being addicted to alcohol, addicted to sex, addicted to all these love shops. And as for their biological needs, we have talked about how essentially biologically inside of the current status quo, having a family or having children there has been a lower emphasis on that. Things such as the one-child policy inside of China and things like that have all decreased the importance of having children inside of the current world, especially when we are on the verge of overpopulation, right? We see that especially in this like current society, in their society of which like biological needs are like no longer necessary, even if they were even if they provide like some sense of happiness, we see that overall in our world we provide greater fulfillment because there's a greater potential or greater just overall fulfillment and sense of happiness that we can collect, right? We see that in our world we have a concrete ability to get human condition, like human companionship, and we have the ability to actually seek and make our own fulfilling life, right? We see that it's different than in the current status quo. It is different than our original state of mind, where we haven't done all of these things that we've made us fulfilled, right? We see that the difference inside of their model is that they can actually attain all of their things that would quote unquote make them fulfilled just whenever they want, which doesn't make it fulfilling. We see it, right? We see that because like first off, they're not able to create those genuine companionships, which my second speaker talked about, creates that fundamental sense of fulfillment and sense of happiness, but also the fact that they simply can attain whatever they want, and therefore they don't ever feel like a sense of fulfillment of like being able to create happiness on their own, because they're just essentially everything is done for them whenever they want it, they get it, right? We see that's essentially what happens, right? So ultimately, what has the opposition given you today, right? We've essentially shown you how in this clash of fulfillment and happiness, how the opposition has definitely taken it over the proposition, right? We see how in their model it is virtually impossible or really difficult to actually attain this distinction between fulfillment and normal and just normality, right? We see that if they continue to have this sense of having sex or having those pleasures, that pleasure will become the normality, and they won't ever be able to get that sense of happiness. When we talk about the rich people, this is exactly what we meant by it. How the rich people, even though they have stress and stuff, when they're always constantly indulging in those that indulge in like a lot of happiness stuff, they don't end up actually getting happiness because of this essential. Because they're living in that perpetual normality, right? We gave you two big contentions about how in our world we can actually like go on our journey and create our own happiness and actually experience happiness, how in their world they can't. We talked about how in our world we can actually create lasting companionship, which ultimately leads to fulfillment and the importance fulfillment and importance of happiness. And however, in their world, we talk about how they can't actually attain any of these positive impacts, and therefore we are ultimately very happy to oppose. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the opposition whip for that speech. Now I'd like to invite the government whip to close the case for team government and close the debate as a whole. Hear.
In my whip speech today, I'll firstly go through some quick lines of rebuttal, as most of the points on the opposition side were brought up in the rebuttal speech, which we think is actually very against the format. But okay, let's go into the rebuttal, right? So firstly, like a lot of the reasoning goes into their basically one and only point, which is that like fulfillment and happiness and emotions don't exist on our side of the house, because like instant pleasure is like almost very, very accessible. Like, first of all, that's like a complete ignoration of our point on like a biological urge to have children. The opponent's only response to this is that in the current modern status quo, people are already having less children, but they don't show you why that biological urge is going away, because that biological urge isn't, right? Like people still have the urge to go out there and like copulate, right? Like that's how you know that the biological urge to have children, it still exists in the current status quo. We don't think the opponent's like line of reasoning is fulfilled enough to like rebut this point. And like Brandon also provided a lot of reasoning, like with no direct engagement from the opponent's team. Like they just bring more reasoning, like they're, yeah, and we believe that our points still stand because of that. Now, their only other point, which is basically the whole idea of social interactions. So first of all, like we don't think that this is very mutually exclusive, right? They don't prove why that's impossible on our side. They just say that people will go and do weed. Now, we don't believe that doing weed means that you won't have any friends, right? Like the opponents didn't show you that either. And if like you've actually seen the movie, then you would know that a lot of individuals within the movie actually have friends, right? That's like what the movie is. Like we're debating the movie, we're debating so like that's the context we're debating in. But in any case, it's not mutually exclusive, right? Like social interactions can exist on our side of the house. And we believe it's much more likely, right? Because people don't face the burdens of like raising a child or like extreme stress or getting old, right? Like that's all addressed on our side of the house. Now, like, let's go through all of the points that we have brought up. It's about like psychological and I think that we have provided a lot of material. I have provided material and Brandon has provided material. And we also essentially have the point about like I just provided reasoning on that. And finally, we have a point on the whole idea of like 30-year like end goal, like of a life actually resolves individuals. This has seen absolutely.
Oh, wait, Connor, your audio, I don't know what's going on with your audio, man.
Okay, is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay, I think I put a piece of paper over the microphone. Okay, sorry. Should I go like 30 seconds back?
No, just keep going.
Okay. So yeah, I think on the fact that the opponents did not rebut our point on like how like the 30 years end goal is essentially like better, allows people to lead more fulfilling lives. I think on that we can just take the debate. But why else should we take this debate as the winner? The main reason would be that like the opponent's points comparatively do not stack against our impacts. The only sort of case that they have on their side of the house is they say that, okay, people are more happy and more likely to like lead a more fulfilling life. You can assume all of that is true, and we would still win the debate based simply on the fact that on our side of the house, we already told you that like a lot of things like famine, disease, and like widespread human catastrophe is all averted. The opponents have not proved why comparatively their points on happiness stacked against like the myriad of benefits where people get, where they don't have to worry about the economy and where they don't have to worry about things like disease and famine. So I think based on that, we can take this debate as a whole. Overall, Judge, like this, like I said before, this is a debate about like whether if having more utility justifies shortening an individual's life. We have already proven to you why it is justified to shorten an individual's life for more utility. And we believe that we provide like a lot of utility on our side of the house and so much more than the opponents do in today's debate. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everybody for that wonderful debate. Now, if you all could, please move back into the main hall in the auditorium while Claire and I are going to deliberate the result, and then we will come back into the main hall to deliver the result to all of you after the round ends. Thank you very much.